Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Masters of Architecture Open House Curriculum Presentation for Spring 2025. I'm Mario Gooden. I'm the director of the Master of Architecture program, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to Columbia GSAPP. And first and foremost, I should say congratulations on being admitted to Columbia, and we are really looking forward to seeing you this fall. I want to sort of share quite a bit with you this afternoon about our program, and then you'll also, or I will be joined by some of our faculty here to answer your questions and to talk to you a little bit more. And then we'll let you be on your way to visit the studios and other classes that are going around in our building this afternoon. But you know, as the Dean was saying, our planet is going through enormous environmental, social, and technological changes. They manifest across scales and ways in terms of bodies, space, ecologies, politics, and aesthetics, and how these intersect and are entangled. These intersections are the terrain in which the various disciplines in our school operate, and this is why what we do here at GSAPP is so important. And I would say so important now more than ever. Our school has always been at the forefront of leading change in our discipline, beginning with the first paperless studios 30 plus years ago, in the architecture programs which occurred right here in Avery Hall, actually right here when I was a student. And as you saw with the Dean's presentation earlier in Low Library, you know, Avery, or the architecture programs here, really occupy this building in what I would call a kind of really, really condensed laboratory. As the Dean said, we sit above the world's foremost art and architecture library, that is Avery Library, which I hope that you will spend lots of time. You will get to know what your sort of favorite spot is in the library. And you know, if you were to come back and visit, you know, during exam week, you would probably find out that there are students from other parts of the university who spend more time in our library than it seems that we do. But it's really a fantastic sort of place to begin to kind of talk about the Masters of Architecture program. The Avery Library is not just an archive. It's I would say a kind of living archive which you will be adding your work to, you'll be adding your thoughts to, that you should use as a resource in addition to what you do in the design studios. You're using it as a resource for history theory, you're using it as a resource for technology, what have you. The Dean referred to our spatial situation as a kind of octopus, if you will, and he sort of took you on a video that went through to Fairweather, and you got to see a bit of the making studio that you see here. You also got to see the Natural Materials Lab, run by Professor Lola Benalan. But our school, if you will, really kind of seeps and touches different parts of campus. And I would say that in this way, we actually get to, let's say, spatialize or kind of experience spatially the way that architecture touches and is related to other disciplines, and I would say is entangled, if you will, with the spatial and political construction, if you will, of the academy and of the university. So here we are back looking at Avery, and I would say that yes, this is a place of research. It is a place of experimentation. It is a place of design within the Masters of Architecture program, but it is also a place of action and activism. So from 1968 that you see here on the left, when students occupied Avery, and if you sort of read history or are a student of history, you know that that was a very, very tumultuous year, to 2017 when our students responded by saying, "We will not build your wall." But let's talk more about the Masters of Architecture program. So we often get the question of what sets GSAPP apart, what sets the Masters of Architecture program apart. And I would answer that with these three, if you will, questions. We do not presume to know what architecture is. Architecture is a question. Architecture is not a given, and architecture is not a preconceived condition. So, as the dean was saying, if you're expecting to come to GSAP and design what, I don't know, Starchitects were designing 25 years ago, that's already known, and it's probably not the right place for you. We really want to kind of ask questions. What is architecture? And I would say, what if? What if architecture? And to think of architecture as an action, not simply about sort of object making, but architecture as event, architecture as action. And in The Source of Self-Regard, Toni Morrison states, "My effort to manipulate American English was not to take standard English and use vernacular to decorate over it, but to carve away at its secretions of deceit, blindness, ignorance, paralysis, and sheer malevolence, such that certain kinds of perceptions were not only available, but were inevitable." Likewise, I would say that our program seeks to carve away at the boundaries of the discipline. While you will be learning about the discipline and learning the fundamentals, we also want to question those boundaries and understand, let's say, architecture's entanglements with modernity and coloniality. At the same time, we want to think about what's possible. And in the second part of the Masters of Architecture program, we've been talking about this notion of possibilism last semester and this semester, looking back at an economist named Albert R. Hirschman, who was an economist, a professor here at Columbia, who wrote that to underline the multiplicity and creative disorder of the human adventure, to bring about the uniqueness of a certain occurrence, and to perceive an entirely new way of turning a historical corner. Unless novelty, creativity, and uniqueness take place, large-scale social change cannot occur. In the first place, if all elements of social dynamics were already known, again, we presume not to know what architecture is, it is not a preconceived condition, reactionary forces could easily foresee and preempt them. Second, Hirschman says, radical reformers are unlikely to generate the extraordinary social energy they need to achieve change unless they are exhilaratingly conscious of writing an entirely new page of human history. So for the longest time, the Master of Architecture curriculum, I would say, has engaged or thought about a radical pedagogy. Given the complexities and urgencies that we face, we've been thinking over the last 2-3 years within the architecture program, what is a radical pedagogy of uncertainty? And how can we make uncertainty productive? Uncertainty does not need to be thought of as nihilistic or as negation, but how might uncertainty be productive? And then that goes back to Hirschman's ideas around possibilism. So hence, in order to resituate the discipline of architecture, what are design strategies for deploying embodied knowledge, confronting extractivism and capital accumulation, constructing mutualism within interspecies ecologies, and modeling spatial reparations? And there were a host of other issues that the dean mentioned earlier as well, and I will also talk about those. And so we explore those. The dean mentioned the data morning clinic. These are M.Arch students who are part of the data morning clinic with Marina Otero Vezio and Farah Akuri. Some of this work, and again, this is thinking about not only climate, environment, but also technology and how technocracy is entangled and informs all of those. And what are the strategies that we can sort of use to consider, again, an architecture of what if architecture. This is from Professor David Benjamin's studio last spring, looking at using new materials, if you will, like straw, natural materials, in order to combat carbonization. Architecture is one of the largest producers of carbon in the environment. And you'll hear a little bit more about that when I talk to you about Studio 2 that hopefully you'll get to visit upstairs today. I'm going to go through these very quickly. But all of those have to be sort of put into context, right? Have to be put into historical context. And so we think together with history. History and theory at GSAP are not sort of used at the service of architecture, but we think together with history and history, let's say, in real time. This is Race and Modern Architecture, which was edited by Professor Mabel Wilson, Irene Chang, and Charles Davis. And Professor Wilson just completed the 4th of her Mellon series lectures at the National Gallery on yesterday. Let me just say they were awesome. And you can watch them on Zoom. So just go there. I think we have more, and I'll talk about our faculty later, but we have some of the most brilliant faculty anywhere in the world right here in our school, and you will get to work with them and learn from them. And so let's now sort of dive down a little bit more into the curriculum. So the faculty have seen this slide many, many times, and they'll go, oh, you know, we really don't know what these colors mean or what these strands mean, but I'm going to try to break it down for you a little bit. So our curriculum is structured along these 6 strands, if you will: the design studios, building science and technology, our representation sequence, and I'll mention why we call it representation in a bit, history theory, professional practice, and then we have our electives. The Masters of Architecture program, as you know, is 6 semesters. The first 3 semesters we've framed over the last 2-3 years around questions of architecture. Again, so we start with the question, what is architecture? What if architecture? And in the second 3 semesters, practicing uncertainty. So again, how do we make this notion of uncertainty and radical pedagogy uncertainty, how do we make that productive? And so within the first 3 semesters, we are, let's say, learning the foundations of the discipline, but also asking other questions about embodiment, subjectivity, ecology, environment, care, equity. We're building up, let's say, our own sort of knowledge system and language in which to talk about these issues and how they relate not only in terms of the design studios, but across the other sequences: technology, representation, history theory. And if you look at this slide, you'll see questions of architecture in the design studio, but also the 2 required history theory courses, questions of architecture, 1 in the fall, and questions of architectural history, 2 in the spring. The second semester, in terms of the studio, we posit architecture as the production of knowledge with a studio called Damage Control that I will share some work with from that studio with you shortly. And in the third semester, architecture and design as situated practice. And I would say really the question of practice runs throughout the 6 semesters. Yes, we have a professional practice course, required course that you will take, but we really think about practice and what does it mean to practice across all 6 semesters. And then the 4th semester, the studio is framed around contested territories, so we're thinking at the kind of larger scale, and how that relates across the curriculum in terms of technology, a representation sequence, history theory. In the 5th semester, this is where our studios actually join with the Master of Science in Advanced Architectural Design. So there are 18 studios, almost 20 sometimes, that you'll get to select from because, again, you'll be working with the AAD students. We have your schedule, as you'll see, loosens up a little bit and gives you some space for electives. We have our professional practice. And in the 6th semester, our final semester, again, practicing uncertainty, your history theory distribution, and electives. So you can find all of that information on the website, and you'll see what's required each semester. Darwin Ng, who's the assistant director of the Master of Architecture program, will really serve as your official advisor to make sure that you graduate on time, to make sure that you are taking your courses when you should. But during the first and second semester, and I want to start here with history theory, the required history and theory courses, Questions of Architectural History 1 and 2, stress a broad social and cultural approach to architectural history with particular attention to emerging global concerns. Architectural history is seen in terms of a rich matrix of parameters which are political, economic, artistic, technological, and discursive that have a role in shaping the discipline. And this is from QAH2, the course that the students are taking this semester. And so you can see what the topics are. And you should ask Professor Reinhold Martin more about this and how these two courses are constructed. For those of you who studied architecture as an undergrad, your architectural history course might have been the giant survey that starts from antiquity and goes to, I don't know, 1945. That's where mine stopped when I was a student. For some reason, there was nothing after 1945. But in any case, that's not the way that we do history here. We think about history in terms of space and time, and we consider not only what was going on, let's say, within the what one might sort of call the architectural canon based upon European architecture, but also what was going on in the colonies, for example. And parallel to this, in the second semester, or simultaneous to Questions of Architectural History course, the first-year design studios, again, focus on disciplinary knowledge while also treating the discipline as a contested and uncertain terrain across multiple scales, from the architectural detail to infrastructure, and in particular, the second semester, as I said, we treat architecture in terms of research. And this is a studio called Damage Control that's curated by Professor Mark Suramaki that you'll hear from later, in which students select their own sites, identifying sites of damage, which may be environmental damage, which may be damage related to climate control, but it also may be the ways in which architecture is sort of mediated, so damage in terms of media. And then we identify the sites of damage, analyze the sites of damage, and then there's an exercise where the students materialize and try to understand the material ramifications of that damage. And I'm just kind of going to go very closely. A number of these images that you've seen in recent weeks, recent months in the news. Again, sites related to colonization, sites related to the body, the materiality, how does that get sort of manifest in sort of the real world in terms of material conditions. And then, as the dean was saying, we think about sort of real world issues. So we think about this as sort of situated research or situated experimentation. And so this is sort of where we are. If you go upstairs today, you'll see the students working, on their, I guess we have about 5 weeks left in the semester, working on the remaining sort of schedule here in terms of, we've already passed mid-review, but their last assignment working there. But these are some examples from this semester, from the exercise where students located their sites of damage, conducted analyses, and that analyses ran from large scale to small scale. And then the materialization of these, this is a student project that sort of looked at media and the mediation, if you will, of architecture as a site of damage, material studies and translations. And then in terms of the building science and technology sequence, with emerging social, technocratic, bodily, and environmental crises, this sequence, our tech sequence, takes a strong position forward in terms of critical approaches to embrace uncertainty in the unfixed binary conditions of nature, the nature of materials, tools, buildings, their resulting construction systems, moving towards decarbonization, reuse, and questions of materiality. And questions of materiality, we're also thinking about what makes technology different, if you will, at GSAP. And this question about decarbonization, or questions about decarbonization and materiality, and how do we, again, learn the conventions, and this is what you see here in our AT3 and AT4 course that happens in the fall and runs parallel, but then also how do we sort of move this forward? How do we move this forward in terms of decarbonization, in terms of the ways in which architecture itself contributes to damage in the environment? And then representation. And so I think it was maybe a year or 3 semesters ago, we decoupled, if you will, computation, and the dean mentioned the computational glue, to think about computation as happening across all of the programs of the school, from representation and under what we used to call sort of visual studies. The main reason for that is also we wanted to rethink the notion of subjectivity. Who is the subject of representation? Who is the subject within architecture? This is some of the work from last fall, from the ADR, Architectural Drawing and Representation 1 course. And this notion of questioning the subject. Most of you know this guy, right? The Da Vinci, from the Da Vinci drawings based upon Vitruvius's 10 Books of Architecture. Well, architecture has never been about a universal subject, right? And different cultures have always sort of built, not just cultures that look like that guy. So we wanted to really think about other ways in which we can, to think about architectural representation, to think about how existing systems of architectural representation perhaps perpetuate certain systems of hierarchy. And so within the representation sequence, we're thinking about time-based media. We're also bringing in movement and choreography and other kinds of representations, such that we have at our disposal a number of tools that we can use to really begin to explore new ways of thinking through architecture. And then Studio 4 that you will visit, have a chance to visit upstairs. Some of those studios may have a pinup going on today, works at the scale of territory. And at this scale, we are working within suburban and rural sites, but this is also, underlying that is thinking about sort of property, thinking about land, thinking about property, thinking about how sites have been used as sites of extraction, if you will, how those sites may have been, what are the histories of those sites, what are the sort of deep embedded knowledges that inform what those sites are. Architecture has never, and the dean showed a book in his presentation, Deserts are not empty, but no site is empty. No site is tabula rasa. It all has a history. The land has a history. So how do we think about the indigenous histories of different sites? How do we think about the ways in which landscapes have been industrialized? And so in this studio, students work on sites, let's say sites like the Croton Reservoir, upstate New York, this is the Rockaways, to out on Long Island. And remember, New York City is a coastal city. We are a city that is susceptible, very much susceptible to climate change. And for those of you who live here, you know that already because you perhaps have experienced the flooding that happens when we get a severe rain event. And these are some of the student works from a year ago, spring of '24. This was a student looking at the Rockaways, and a student looking at Jamaica Bay, a pair of students looking at a site on Jamaica Bay, and a site actually that is being used to house immigrants. So looking at immigrant housing within this wetland site and how to think about reparations there. And then in Studio 6, so all of our studios are actually going on today. Studio 2, our first year studios, occur on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Our Studio 4 and Studio 6 occurs on Mondays and Thursdays. So you'll get to actually see everyone today. In Studio 6, as I mentioned, we've been talking about possibilism this semester as a kind of overall sort of framework for all 18 studios working in their, let's say, own sort of mini ecologies. And here I think you will see, some of the studio topics and the broad array of studio topics. And for the Masters of Architecture students, for you, and for the MSAAD students in your last 2 semesters, we have visiting critics, international visiting critics, part of the Dean's Visiting Professors series, who come and bring their expertise and work with you as well. And we also have our clinics. So you see another version of the second version of the Data Morning clinic with Marina Otero and Dan Miller, to a housing clinic that is a joint studio between the architecture programs and the MS Red program that is being taught by Professor Michael Bell, and Chris Munsell that you see there. And yes, this gives you, a sense of, the diversity within the program. And some of the student work, this is from this semester, this is David Benjamin's studio, their initial research before mid-reviews, materials, studies, material inventions, if you will. So again, sort of real-world scenarios. This is from Professor Laurie Hawkinson and Hubert Chang's studio looking at a grain silo in Red Hook. And these critics are here, so if you have some questions, you can ask them about what's going on here. And Professor Maria Lizarraga studio, their early studies at the beginning of the semester, making ecological cosmologies, if you will. And I mentioned professional practice. We have a required course in the fall and a couple of electives in the spring, an advanced professional practice course that uses Professor Robert Herman's book, Law for Architects, which is super fantastic. We also have Professor Juan Herrera's course on unorthodox practice. And then after 6 semesters, you arrive at the end. And maybe it's not the end, it's just another beginning. This is our end of the year show from 2024 that you can visit on the school's website and see and take your time with the work, look at it in depth. As a requirement for graduation for the M.Arch program, as well as for the AAD program, the Masters of Architecture and Urban Design program, you will be required to submit a portfolio. And these are last year's portfolios from most of our graduating students that you can also take a look at their work. Again, Darwin Ng is the Assistant Director for the Masters of Architecture program. You will get to know Darwin very, very well. and Darwin will be able to answer any of your questions about your course requirements to make sure that, that you are on schedule and on time. Also for some of you who may be able to get advanced standing for certain courses or waivers, Darwin will be able to answer those questions for you as well. And so I think I did pretty good. I think I did that in half an hour so that we can spend the bulk of our time this afternoon talking to you and answering your questions. So thank you very much. So I want to invite some of our faculty here, Professor Reinhold Martin, Laurie Hawkinson, David Benjamin, yes, Amlin Eng, Maria Lizarraga, Galia Solomonov, Mark Suramaki, and Juan Herreros, and Michael Bell. So I'll just ask each if you could just say two quick words, and then we'll open it up for questions, starting with you, Juan. Only two.
Hello, everyone. Well, I'm Juan Herreros, professor of Advanced Studio 6 and running seminars about professional practice. And it's a pleasure to see all of you here. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Laurie Hawkinson, architect, and I'm teaching Advanced Studio 6 this semester, which I can explain if anybody has questions about the grain terminal and adaptive reuse of that project in Red Hook, and also teach a seminar with Galia Salmonov here on the Outside In or Inside Out project where we build an inflatable. We have in the past.
Welcome. I'm Reinhold Martin. I'm a historian of architecture, and among other things, I direct the sequence, the core, as Mario was saying, the history core classes. And I hope that every single person in this room comes to learn with us next semester.
Dual mics. Hi, everyone. I'm Amlin Ung. I coordinate the representation sequence, architect, researcher, sometimes cartoonist. And I'm currently teaching a seminar called Wasteworks and the Architectural Drawing and Representation 2. Nice to see you all.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Benjamin. I generally teach advanced studios and also a seminar called Footprint, Carbon, and Design. And my work in general and my teaching has recently been focused on sustainability and scaling up from prototype to impact at scale.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Suramaki, and as Mario indicated, I'm currently directing the Architecture Studio 2, which engages questions of environmental damage and architecture's role in more regenerative systems. I also teach advanced studios, and I teach a seminar that looks at the implications of biogenic materials, which has become one of the kind of recent focuses of my work.
Good afternoon. Welcome to GSAP in Columbia. My name is Michael Bell. I teach upper-level design studios, one of which Mario just described. It's a clinic, a new format of joint studios with, in this case, the real estate development program with Chris Munsell and I. We're looking at the private equity practices in the the boom on this is, I'm trying to find, the private equity firms in the United States holding upwards of 1 million single-family houses, creating a joint course with different types of expertise to imagine the implications and possible future of that around design, and also seminars. But most of us here have at various times directed programs and or been brought back. Laurie and I are currently acting directors of the tech sequence. So we all have a kind of constant interchange, which is really fruitful for the faculty. Maybe? Yes.
Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to see you all. My name is Miria Luzarraga. I usually coordinate the Core 1 sequence, the first semester of studio. I'm also teaching Advanced 6 this semester and a seminar. Our projects usually, our studios focus in the notion of ecology in a very intersectional way, and overcoming the very technical approach that we usually give in architecture.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Galia Solomonov. I'm a practicing architect. I teach 3 things. I teach the third studio with concentrates on housing, multiple dwellings, multiple homes. I also teach advanced design, and this semester we're doing layered urbanism, focusing on a building by Paul Rudolph that exists in the Bronx, 2 towers, 40 stories, and try to reintegrate it into the fabric in that location. Then I teach with Professor Laurie Hawkinson. We have done 4 iterations of this inflatable where the students design and build a full-scale, very fun thing, inflatable in the courtyard. And then I direct Housing Lab, that is a study group to advance what we know about housing, and we have been focusing on affordable housing.
Great. So we'll take the first question. You guys, you need a little bit more time to warm up. Here we have one. Oh, sure. Thank you.
Hello. Nice to meet you all. I think...
I'm sorry, can you tell us your name?
My name is Julie Winterholm. I'm M.Arch, accepted student. Very excited and honored. I think, obviously, in the wake of climate change and like anthropocentrism and us kind of coming to terms to that, architecturally, we are having to face that. And I'm curious, like, how does your school kind of interact with like developers or kind of the people making and doing actual things with designers? Like, how do we kind of exchange with the people who are the doers, if that makes sense? Obviously, architects are doers, we're the designers, we're the thinkers, but how does that kind of like, how have we managed to kind of reach that separation?
Michael.
That's a very good question and super relevant one. It's it feels a bit pretentious to answer this on behalf of the school, so take it as we have a large faculty and it's New York City, so the faculty, whether they're from history theory or from practice, they're highly engaged with these types of questions. So that's one answer. But the school has a core studio around housing, which Galia mentioned that she's currently teaching. I had 11 years of directing that, but that goes all the way back to 1977. It got formalized around the era of Richard Plunz and Kenneth Frampton teaching housing. This will sound like me getting off track, but I once asked Kenneth and Richard, when you founded that, was it a political goal? Bella Abzug was a congresswoman who claimed housing is a right. It's not. And Richard said, no, it was never a right. It was just in the water that we would do this. So something that kind of is built into being in New York, questions about housing and how it, I noticed in Mario's diagram, there was, in the history theory sequence, there was maybe the third week, I think, had the word type in it. But the other side of it is more directly, I teach a course called Rescaling Housing. It's jointly offered with the Climate School. I love teaching the course, but it finds me dealing with housing law historically, economics. I have a new book that just came out last week called Housing After Banking, where I go into 100 years of housing economics, but not being there. So, but as much as that's my version of the story, it's anybody who works in New York, these questions come up, and especially the people in practice who go through zoning and codes, and Laurie has built some incredibly interesting housing right on the New York City grid. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll take it too. I'll try this. So I was thinking when you asked about the studio I'm doing right now in Red Hook for this grain terminal, which has been sitting there for a long time. And I keep telling my students, it's free. It's free. All this, it's there. It's already built, but we have to just excavate, right? So, but also we have to think about where we are and what the context is for this grain terminal, which is an incredible location in the city. So we haven't the resources here at Columbia alone, because we're in New York City. I was able to bring Kate Asher in, who is in the real estate development program, who knows that site like the back of her hand, plus all of Brooklyn, and she could tell us the whole history. And we learned incredible things like, the subway is going to be coming up here. They're going to do it. There's housing here. All these things that we were thinking this should be. She says, oh yeah, all that will come. I'm guarantee you that will come. And she worked at EDC, Economic Development Corporation for a number of years in the city, where that's the agency in the city that actually builds projects on public land, right? So they do joint public-private partnerships. So I think that being here in the city, you're inevitably involved with a number of people that are really on the ground and involved in things in the city, but also globally. I don't think to mean we're just local to New York City, even though the city's a big place. So I think that the resources we have here are pretty extensive and very exciting, actually, for somebody who's teaching here, I find.
Yeah, I mean, you also, you know, if you've, I imagine that there may be some of you in this room who are contemplating dual degree between Masters of Architecture and MS Red, Masters of Science in Real Estate Development, which you can speak with some of our graduating students in the M.Arch program. We have quite a few of them who are also dual degree with the MS Red. I mentioned the clinic, this is that Michael is doing with Chris Munsell, but for a number of years we've had a joint architecture and real estate studio course. So there will be opportunities for you to work with students in the MS Red program. And because we have an MS Red program in the school, hopefully there is some cross-pollination going on between the programs in terms of, yes, our students get to major, but also the students in real estate development, most of whom will graduate and work in New York for some period of time. You know, so they are going to become a part of, you know, I guess the movers and shakers, if you will. They're being a bit more informed about, you know, architecture in the built environment.
And maybe, I know there are probably other questions, but I'll just add quickly. I mean, I think it's a really important question. I'd just like to maybe broaden it a little bit. Like, developers are one player, and we've got a lot of ways of addressing that. But government is another player. And for example, Lori, just to call on you again, you're working with the federal government on projects out in the real world. The US government, I believe, is the largest consumer of concrete in the country, consumes over, like specifies and consumes over 50% of the concrete that gets made in this country. And the US government as a whole is the largest single consumer in the world. So there are levers other than developers like government. A couple of other quick things. We mentioned the climate school before, and I think that's a really tangible connection to addressing climate change and sustainability even outside of design through things like engineering and policy and you know, law and things like that. And finally, I think there are a number of people, you know, including, you know, Mark here and myself a little bit, addressing supply chains, but like in the real world, because that's another place that this actually happens and decisions get made. You know, so addressing things and working with people like mass timber companies, but also say startup companies or others in other countries, places like India. My studio's looking at that this semester, who are trying to work with a huge volume of rice straw, which is typically burned but could potentially make its way into buildings. So I think there's a number of ways that people are touching this topic and looking at real world impact, not just hypothetical situations.
Another question. That was just the first one, yes. Oh, we have a question.
Hello, my name's Nina Lazaro. The main question that I do have is about research opportunities. As Mario was discussing the curriculum, one thing I noticed was, I guess the opportunity for research. I know Columbia GSAP is really focused on research, but how can a student implement like a research thesis track within their own curriculum? Would it be engaging with faculty? Is it an opportunity we can introduce in our own curriculum? That's the main question I have. Thank you.
Gaio, do you want to speak about the housing lab?
Sure. So research is a very important component of every studio, I would say. where the critic would propose a question, like Mario said, and then the student will engage that question and research. We do not do a thesis. We do 6 semesters of studio. And then there are different labs. I direct one, the housing lab. And so there, it's a very small group. We are 3 students and I. And so there we set up a number of questions. This, for example, right now we are investigating what we call middle housing. Why are there like big, large buildings built by large groups, and then single homes? But there seems to be like a missing middle. And so for that, we're engaging other researchers in the US and our own team. And so the question comes up, and so how do we select those 3 students? There's an open call, and depending on the funding for that year, we are able to take 2, 3 students in that. And like that lab, there are many labs. I don't know if you can mention any of the other labs. I know Death Lab. Which other labs do we?
One of them is the Spatial Information Design Lab. So things with data visualizations and mapping.
Yeah, there's also
the Natural Materials
the
Lab.
Natural Materials Lab, the Global Africa Lab.
But just to emphasize really quickly, I think what Galia is saying, because I think your question is kind of like, what about my own agenda, research agenda as a student? So there are opportunities to plug into the research agendas of labs and other faculty. But I would say that almost every studio, I'm just kind of repeating and emphasizing what you said, Galia, but every studio really encourages you to think for yourself and take your own position, even from the very first studio, Studio One. And that really opens up quite a bit in the final 2 or 3 studios, where I really tell my students and treat the studio as a mini thesis. So it's not a year long with a semester of research and then a semester of design, but it's kind of compressing that whole thing into one semester. And I think there are several, many studios that do that in their own way, in different ways. So just in short to say, I think there are a lot of ways for you to develop your own position and your own research agenda within the field.
Yeah,
And also through the
Go ahead, Laura.
I was gonna say, through this, just to follow up on what David's saying, so, there's a huge array of studios, and you curate your own path through that. So you may have an agenda that you begin to hone in on, that you would continue to work through in a series of studios. It's completely possible. Or independent projects, or in seminars, right? Because you're selecting those seminars, you're gaining more information rather than just working by yourself. I did a thesis at Cooper Union, so I'll speak from a little experience. But doing your own research in your own project, you're kind of also in a number of groups of people who are looking at different aspects maybe of the agenda that you're pursuing, or the question that you're asking, the directed question, as Reinhold always says, the thesis is.
Yeah, and pursuing that through line could begin in first year, right? The first semester, in terms of the design studio, you will be assigned, but the second semester, from there through the 6th semester, it's by lottery, right? So each critic, although the second semester and third semester, let's say the third semester may be on housing, each critic has an overlay to the general syllabus. So you are able to, via lottery, determine who is it that you would like to work with, because let's say maybe their interests align with your interests, or you are able to, let's say, curate or find a through line for your work to kind of move through.
Thank you so much.
Sure. We have another question. No, a mic is coming.
Hi, my name's Cole. I'm just wondering, as far as finding that path or through line and choosing your own classes and your own studios, what type of guidance is available in making that choice and learning about the different options? Because it seems
So the way it works is we present to all the students, let's say six, the first 3 studios, there are 6 variables, right? 6 different studios. And in the last 2, there are 18. And so each...
Actually 8.
8.
The first 3, there are 8.
In the first 3, there are 8 groups.
The first 4, there are 8.
In the first 4, there are 8. In the last 2, there's 18,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so each one of the critics, us, will present in 10 minutes what we're planning to study to all of you. And by now, you know people you know your cohort. And so you will determine, you will say, this person, I rank it number 1, I 2, 3, or 4, and then the lottery tries to pair the students with the teachers that they prefer. And it works out, I think shakes out pretty well, that it's that students get their first choice and teachers get a really nice group.
Yeah.
So I was also thinking that we have comprehensive reviews. So at the end of the year, first year and second year, you turn in your portfolio and then you'll meet with 2 faculty, you decide which 2, you sign up, and you'll have a session where you can talk about, kind of assess what you did over the year and what you're missing or what you want to gain, and, have a conversation about how you might, curate that route you're talking about.
Yeah, but let me just add that that's not only about the design studio. So, and I'm going to ask Reinhold to speak, because you're going to also be reading a lot, writing a lot, and so your ideas are also going to be informed by, your questions of architectural history 1, questions of architectural history 2, your distribution electives, your other electives that you take. So that is also where where your research is going to be sort of conducted. That is also where your agenda is going to be informed, by those courses as well. So Reinhold, I don't know if you would like to say anything about that.
I don't know if people have specific questions about the history classes. I'm happy to answer them. But, what we have found over the years, and every year it's a bit different, is that people enter into this field, this is a professional school, with many different forms of prior academic experience, some of which is more kind of classically liberal arts, in which you might have been writing research papers throughout, and some is from the fine arts, some is from technical fields, and so on and so on. So it's a very heterogeneous kind of classroom in many, many ways, whichever classroom you're in a sense, like from the seminars to the studios. And from the point of view, especially the first couple of semesters, what Mario's talking about, these 2 first classes, we really treat them not so much as, that's why I said I hope you'll come and learn with us next semester. We're not trying to train you to do something in those classes. We're inviting you to think with us and to become, in a way, better learners, which is a term that's more commonly used even in high school, but certainly in college. And so there's an element of the way in which we approach historical knowledge that is broadly humanistic and broadly historical, not, in other words, just oriented towards, immediately solving a problem in upstairs in the studio and so on. And that's the spirit of the library that we, always, these are not necessarily, they can be places in which to think through immediate concerns, that you might be dealing with elsewhere. But most importantly, I think, for all of us who teach in these classes, these are environments in which we're learning to think together, to think historically together about what has happened and what is happening, and about our fields, that is broadly understood architecture and urbanism and landscape and all the kind of associated fields of the built environment, these fields, relationship and participation in historical events.
And I would just add that although GSAP, collectively speaking, is a large and complex entity, as studios, as individual studios, actually they're fairly well proportioned, right? So meaning that although the school itself is incredibly dynamic and complex, you'll be spending a lot of time with your studio instructors and with all of your teachers here at the school. And speaking for myself, I've invariably met with my students on an ongoing basis in many different contexts, not just in the format of desk crits, but also, I think, informal advice, kind of questions about, let's say, what's the next studio coming up? What might you recommend? I think there are many, many different informal avenues for you to enact, very closely, I think, with the faculty who are very involved. You'll be spending a lot of time with us for better or worse, hopefully for better. But I think those interactions, I think, also go a long way to, in a way, helping you to enact your own trajectory through the school, which I agree with everyone is saying is very, very open, and because of both the kind of density of activity, but also because of the kind of diversity of possible studio and other kind of academic offerings. You can really find your own way. I would say, even relative to the previous question about is it possible to enact your own agenda here, I would say that it's impossible to not do so, right? Like, I think really to be at GSAP is to really have to find and navigate your own way and have a certain degree of autonomy and imagination in terms of the way that you're approaching your own education. Right?
I know we shouldn't go on, but I had a flashback when you asked that question. I've spent time teaching at many schools, but the three that were prominent, Berkeley, Rice, Columbia. And so that question would have been answered very differently, or the potential for that would have been very different. At Rice, you would have had all of the support in the world on a one-to-one basis, including probably a free tuition. Berkeley, it would have been office hours, and you might overhear another professor because the walls were plywood. At Columbia, I think all the answers you've gotten here are very good. I'm used to Columbia, but it is fast, and what Mark brought up, the proportional, relatively speaking, the studios are small, and there is room. My students stayed late last week, discussing Thomas Heatherwick's lecture. It was a spontaneous discussion that went on for a long time. But the flashback I had was knocking on a professor's door when I was a graduate student, asking for advice on a grant application. He was busy and notoriously not too friendly, but brilliant. And he said, "You're applying for something serious. Be serious. I don't have time to talk to you." and I never forgot that, because it was like, if you're applying for something, you can kind of internalize a critique yourself. I don't mean to tell you that that was an appropriate reaction, but there's all sorts of ways that happens here. I've never encountered somebody here being so rude, but I never forgot that, because I went home and I thought, was I being serious enough? You're applying for something serious, be serious. Show it to me next week. And I was like, okay. But I do love that about graduate school, where a lot of getting feedback is framing something as far as you can get it, so that the feedback comes back at a much higher level as well. And I think the question about you said curriculum, my own curriculum. I don't know if it'd be a curriculum, but I think that was leading that way. Like, if I can frame something, I can then get more feedback. Columbia, I think, GSAP thrives on that, yeah. But people here are pretty friendly, yeah. Despite it being New York, yeah.
Another question, one.
I was thinking in the questions that have been asked, and all of them are about this or that. But I think the three statements that Mario has shown, and this idea of uncertainty, is exactly to don't have to think like that, no? So this is about blurring boundaries between research and design, between speculation and reality, between theory and practice. And this idea of starting without a net protecting you and stay 3 years looking for what kind of architect do I want to be is the plan that we have for you, if you like it.
Okay. A question in the back there? A microphone is coming.
Hello, I'm Louisa.
Hi, Louisa.
I was wondering about the aspect of the clinics. I noticed you guys make a distinction between the studios and the clinics, and was just wondering if, what is the difference between them, if they only exist in the 1.5 years like later, And then if they're the same within the curriculum, just like if they're more real world application, that kind of aspect.
Yeah, there's something very fundamental about clinics that is both amazing and takes working with. For 2 hours a week, you overlap with the other course. So, which means, and that 2 hours comes out of the studio. That sounds like a minor question, but it's definitely a scenario of being willing and able to get momentum going, collaborate, reach across. But my experience has been, it's been utterly amazing. Just to be very specific, the question about developers, in the clinic with real estate that I'm currently part of leading, it's Chris Munsell, professor. He had a very elaborate 10-page Excel chart on the wall for analyzing single-family houses securitized into private equity funds. But to make a long story short, trying to put a $10,000 solar panel on a single house and that basically damaged the cap rate. You might not know what that term is. So in other words, private equity would probably not pay for the solar panel. I have a million ways to imagine getting around that, doing something innovative, but people were literally, with Chris's input, were seeing like, this will not happen if you do that. So some of the clinics require like incredible persistence when somebody brings up something. Yeah, I say that in a positive way because one thing to do it in that case is to like know the economics of something in ways that nobody would expect you to. Yeah. Very interesting.
Yes, that clinic is particular to the joint studio between architecture and real estate development. However, most of the clinics are not just architecture in one other program, it may be architecture in 2 or 3 other programs. So the data morning clinic is architecture. I think there are some CCCP students, which are critical curatorial conceptual practices students. There might CDP, which is computational design practices. And while the clinics are, let's say, housed in the studio, there is a seminar component that brings everyone together that overlaps with the studio 1 day a week for a couple of hours. We have a clinic this semester on mental health being taught by Anthony Clark, which has, I think it's 10 or 12 architecture students and 5 students from other programs, including CCCP, maybe CDP, and all 17, which was a large number for faculty to travel with, but all 17 traveled to Melbourne during the Kinney Week. So it's not just design and one other program. It could, so you'll get to know people in multiple programs within the school.
That clinic it's only 2 real estate students out of the 10. It is CDP, urban planning. Yeah, so it did work. It wasn't, anyway. Yeah. They're new. You mentioned a 1.5 years old. They're definitely something to help grow.
Yeah. Well, there was another question, I think. Here. Okay, great.
Hi, I was wondering about the opportunities to study abroad and practice abroad, but also how the school kind of avoids recreating colonial relationships in study abroad as an American institution.
Yeah. Okay. So to answer part of that, before we get to the travel part, in terms of studying abroad, we don't have a study abroad program. However, a number of the labs, the Global Africa Lab, maybe Death Lab, some of the other labs, we do have summer workshops in which there are perhaps 5 or so labs that travel during the summer to international destinations from 2 weeks to maybe 4 weeks or 5 weeks. Places like India, Mumbai, or I did a workshop 2 years ago. We went to Dar es Salaam and to Zanzibar, which is like really fantastic. In terms of travel, this is an ongoing question of Colombia not colonial, and I'm sure other faculty do this as well. As Reinhold was saying, our intention is to learn with, not to go and extract knowledge, and to the people that we engage with, for most of us, we have traveled, when we have travel studios, to that location a number of times, so we've formed relationships. So we've formed a kind of mutual sort of trust with, our collaborators in those locations. But that's a very, very good question, and it is one that stays on the top of, yes, this is not Columbia coming and bringing our expertise, but how do we learn with, with those that we're engaging with?
Yeah, if I can, it's a very good question and a difficult one. That's also, I think, why we the second part of the question not being colonial. So, for instance, I think the effort that we put on the Kine Week, so in Advanced 6, every studio would travel to wherever the professor thinks it's important for them to travel. In our case, for instance, we are working on decolonial ecology in the Caribbean, so we travel to Puerto Rico. So we put a lot of effort on trying to engage very much, not being this Ivy League university doing projects for the Caribbean, but engaging with local associations and so on, and socializing all of our projects and working closely with them. Also understanding that the Caribbean is a laboratory of practices that are already working in itself, and learning from them more than us coming with our solutions, and trying, and that is the goal of the Kine trip, and of course the goal of all of our syllabi, if that is possible.
I would add that. So we travel with this endowment, the Kine endowment. I am from South America, so usually I travel to places where my network of I can exchange with the network of teachers that I have: Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Mexico. And so, for example, next semester, a professor that I work with in Brazil is coming to teach here. We have done things, the two studios together, her studio and our studio, their studios. This year we went to Uruguay. We work with the Universidad de la República del Uruguay, that it's a free university. And now they're all coming. They have a trip, and they all are coming here. It's a free university. And the way they do it, they do a rifle. The entire city participates. They collect $10 million in Uruguay, and so the entire 300 students travel, and they will come. They will go to Japan, to India, and so I said that I will receive them, but we are going to have to receive 150 students because they receive, our 15 students. So there are amazing universities out there, and we have connections with them, and they come and they travel to here, and we go there too.
I think there was a question here.
Hello, I'm Michael Stroud, and I have a question about interdisciplinary work within the study program at the M.Arch program. So I was just wondering how it is typically carried out, because let's say if we wanted to work across fields, say with applied science, or very differently with history and archaeology, is this done more typically through the clinics? Is this, because I know Columbia, the program here, has a strong focus on interdisciplinary work, and I was just wondering how this is directly tackled, and how we as students can look to reach out to other areas of study and bring that into design, be it through the studios or through the clinics. So.
Yeah, that is very interesting also, a very interesting question. For instance, I was mentioning the trip that we're doing to Puerto Rico, those students, the local people that we have contacted there and that are closely working with the students, we have this percentage theory that it's just 10% of the people that we contacted are architects. So the students are working with biologists, science, engineers, people that work directly with the earth, so it's 25% activists also, 25% activists, but 25% people that work with the earth, 25% engineers, and that is like the students in the studio are working with the local people that are coming from these fields, no? Also, like engaging with the need of bringing different perspectives to this idea of ecology and how to face the challenges posed by climate change from a multidisciplinary point of view, because the perspectives are very different, and to have these conversations enriches a lot the outcome of the projects, no? So this vision, this interdisciplinary, and you'll see also like all of the lectures, like we are bringing like the actioning summits, if you see, like, I don't know if the dean mentioned about, no, but they are bringing people working in politics, people working with regulations, scientists, social studies people. We are very committed to that, yeah. Also.
And we do also have, as the dean mentioned, as has been mentioned here, formal arrangements, if you will. Michael mentioned his course that he teaches with the climate school. I know Dave has been doing some research with the School of Engineering. Laurie has co-taught with, oh, I'm blanking on his name, Jonathan Cole. Yeah, and teaching with an engineer, but I mean within the university. Yes, sociology. Yes, so within the university, Professor Lindy Roy has been working with neuroscientists here at Columbia. So a number of faculty have those relationships, and they bring that to their studios. Or other courses, I should say, not just studio courses. Oh, here's a question.
I have a question. Oh, I'm Anna. I have a question about licensure. How does GSAP prepare you to become a licensed architect?
Well, we are a professional program. We have Alessandro Orsini's not here, who teaches professional practice, but our professional practice course is, we actually revamped it this last year, and I'm actually quite proud of it, because in that course, our students form practice groups or offices, if you will, and they actually have to put together a business plan and then pitch it to a committee. And the second half of the semester, and this is in the required professional practice course, the students respond to a request for a proposal. So their team, they put together a team, and they actually put together the physical book, and then they make an oral presentation. There's an interview. So in that course, we actually don't just sort of lecture, but the students get, if you will, hands-on experience, because we bring in architects, we bring in people from the city to be on the selection committee, for example, for their final project. And then we have, as I mentioned, Professor Robert Herman, who's an attorney who has worked with a number of architects in the city, including some who teach here, as their attorney, who teaches an advanced professional practice course, and he brings in for every class, people who are in other offices, who are with city government, with state government, to give talks, so that our students are also getting real-world exposure, or exposure to sort of the real world in terms of these courses. So again, it's not just lecturing from, I don't know, the AIA handbook, but actually hearing from practitioners in the courses. And again, we talk about practice throughout the 6 semesters of the M.Arch program. So it's not just in and the final year that we talk about architectural practice and what it might mean to sort of get licensed at some point. And I'll just add, and I know in the housing studio, there are people who come from the Department of Housing and Urban Planning with the city, to give lectures, and that we have that in actually all of our studios, so that you can also see what other kinds of modes of practice there are. Yes, there's getting licensed, but not all of you will decide that you want to be a licensed architect. You might look for other career avenues. And I think someone was going to add something.
Many of these questions, I think that you have a second to ask a question, and you're very graciously framing it and waiting for the reply. We have the same questions frequently. So how do we prepare? How are we interdisciplinary? How do we deal with real estate developers? These things come up, and we are a large school. We don't have a lot of space. We're constantly debating these things. Every time we go through an accreditation, we have to answer them in more pragmatic or didactic ways. But we're also constantly not trying to turn them into didactic paths. So that question about licensure, I would tell it with a slightly humorous story that might be out of date for our age room in the room. 20 years ago, Columbia had a very influential set of faculty. One of them developed a term called the blob, meaning a blob. And it had a whole historical and serious mathematic idea behind it, Greg Lynn, but it was producing shapes that people weren't exactly sure how to engineer. So I remember Bernard Schumi was the dean. Bernard, we recruited engineers. We ended up working, and people were very sophisticated at taking a complex topological form and showing exactly how to draw it. Those people landed at incredibly advanced jobs, and often at major firms that then were using that computational intelligence on behalf of development. So there's a kind of quality that goes on inside the school, like toggling back and forth between experimenting, turning out the experimentation makes you very sophisticated at something, like computing a surface, and then finding out that that's actually an incredible venue into precise modeling of form in a way that absolutely is professional. And everybody here with an office, from David to Mark to Laurie, et cetera, Galia, Mireille, we've all been there. So, but the question is a very good one, like how does a school experiment, and how does it also assure that it's meeting known quantities and demands? That's any good school is asking that question over and over.
Yeah, great. No, I'm just reflecting on all of this, and so it's really great collection of questions. And I'm kind of thinking, also kind of coming back to the first question, touching on also interdisciplinarity and so on. You mentioned the kind of we're the thinkers, and then there are the doers, and I do want to kind of expand that. I think GSAP's really good at expanding the question of like who does the making and doing, and I think in a way everyone who comes here, and at least seeing what folks do after they leave here, you are a doer even while you're here, and I think you don't have to wait for a developer to be a client. I think it's very interesting to also start to rethink the client-architect relationship, and even think about like other forms of collectivity and other forms of doing, I guess, at different scales, whether it's like cultural production or, I'm speaking for representation, so like ways in which media circulates, and kind of projects that are visualization-based or time-based and so on. I think those have currency as well in a different way, and also maybe in complementary ways to the kind of active building as well. So there are many, I think, scales of action, which is very exciting for us here.
I was getting the signal that we have to wrap up, but if someone has an urgent question, I think we have 2 minutes. Maybe we can combine the two. Can we pass the mic?
Hi, I'm April. Just out of curious that, just wondering what are the graduate students are doing right now? Like, how do they bring what they learn from the GSAP to the built environment? If there's any cool examples of like how the graduate students are doing that, because I'm currently working in the field, and I find it a little bit hard to bring what I think and what I think is right to the field, and yeah, just wondering if there's any cool examples.
Okay, and there was another question over here. Okay, so what are they doing, and what percentage going to be licensed architects? Anyone want to take that?
Run the event with your practices that are 10 years or less out of school.
No, it's just a very specific question. I mean, that's a very good question.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know the numbers.
Darwin can actually
Darwin
answer.
knows. Okay.
So I don't know the number. Thank you. Right. I don't know the number right off the top of my head, but career services. So Karen Cover, who's the associate director of career services, she's actually the dedicated person for all things career services, career development related to all the architecture programs. We publish all of our data every single year. So all you have to do is just Google GSAP career services data, and then all the data for the past decade is posted there. That includes things like how quickly someone gets a job after graduating, what their starting salary is, what are their titles, where are they working. So all of that hopefully will help answer that question.
I would just add that question also perhaps changes every few years depending on the economy, right? So, who knows, what the economy may be like, in the next few years or, during this kind of era. When I graduated, it was a very, very bad economy. It was after Black Monday, probably before some of you were born, and there was a recession that lasted a very, very long time. But GSAP actually prepared us, we didn't call it GSAP back then, for a number of different things. So I had classmates, very good friends, who found jobs in Hollywood, for example, and one is still doing it. He's now like a big DP on major films. So an architectural education is not, I would say, particularly here, is not just about becoming a licensed architect. It can prepare you to be able to navigate, what storms there might be in terms of the economy or other things going on.
Yeah, I should be the last one in a sense to answer these questions about the profession, but maybe that helps a little bit because, first of all, to your question about what graduates do, you look around the skyline of New York and you will see our graduates, and in various ways, and despite, I know that there's kind of playful graphics, let's say, and there's maybe a sense that what we do here is maybe, a little bit fun. This is a very serious professional school. And it's really the professional quality of the institution that distinguishes it from what, the kinds of experiences that somebody might have had coming in here, regardless of where you're coming. It can be a little, in disguise, appear in disguise sometimes. But, I'll just add one more historical marker for this. When 9/11 occurred, this school was one of the centers of this very serious debate about very large questions that had to do with architecture, urbanism, politics, culture, society, and I have to say, it's that was occurring at exactly the same time that the alleged experiments and so on were going on about what to do with computers and so on. So this is because people have been asking about the real world. This is the real world. It's a professional school, like a law school or a medical school, in which you are actually learning how to practice a profession. It turns out, as Mario was saying, that profession has more dimensions than might show up on television or something. So that's maybe a thing. I did want to say one thing about interdisciplinarity, because it's kind of like all I do in my life is move around different parts of this university, and there are ways to think about kind of the mixture of things as if somebody else has some maybe more interesting ideas and so on. Sometimes that's true. But part of what I was just saying has to do with the fact that you all, one way or another, have committed to a career of some kind in a specific domain of knowledge that has its own principles, its own histories, its own problems, and that's kind of paradoxically what you will bring to the table is what you're learning here when you're out in some other environment in which somebody else might know something about something that you don't know. So I think, so-called interdisciplinarity is a function of actually quite specialized knowledge. So I want to, what I really wanted to emphasize in general. This isn't, it's not a playground. It's a very serious place.
Yeah. Okay, last word.
Just to close, because with this idea of the practice, I think it's the moment of talking about the Constructing Practice Symposium. Every other year, there is one day that we bring 15 or 16 practices all around the world of people no more than 10 years after their graduation that they did well or they did interesting, just to demonstrate that this is not the happy hour of your life as architects. There is another reasons to be optimistic and to demonstrate that if you navigate, you are the curator of your career and you can make decisions and don't let that the waves take you where you don't want to go. Perhaps in 10 years, you can be here telling us what have you done. If you go to the web of the school and you look for constructing practice, you will see these engaged activist architects that are building, designing, winning competitions. Others are more theoretical, more speculative, more design in terms of designing objects or whatever, but all of them are having a career and are doing it. No? I think that's your question was in that direction. No? How to don't go to the office you shouldn't never apply, no? And make some choices.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. And we'll see you around the building.